The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched before Commander Zekthar like a vast cavern of judgment. His 4 arms hung at his sides as he stood in the center of the circular chamber, surrounded by representatives from 12 different species. The air hummed with tension and the soft whispers of translators working in dozens of languages. Above him, the crystalline dome showed the stars of the galaxy, each one a reminder of the worlds that had fallen under Valerian rule over the past 3 centuries. Zekthar's chitinous armor caught the light from the floating orbs that illuminated the chamber. Each dent and scratch told a story of conquest, of worlds brought under the banner of the Valerian Empire. He had been a soldier for 400 years, rising through the ranks by pure skill and ruthless efficiency. His reputation preceded him across the galaxy as one of the most successful military commanders in Valerian history. The Speaker of the Council, Morden, floated before him in a sphere of pale blue energy. The ethereal being's voice echoed through the chamber without lips or vocal cords, transmitted directly into the minds of all present. Commander Zekthar, you stand before this council to explain one of the most puzzling military decisions in galactic history. After 300 years of expansion, the Valerian Empire suddenly withdrew from human space without firing a single shot. No battles were fought, no negotiations took place, and no surrender was offered. Your fleet simply turned around and left. The council demands an explanation. Zekthar's mandibles clicked together in what humans might have recognized as a nervous habit. He had known this day would come, when he would have to explain his actions to beings who had never seen what he had seen. Honored speaker members of the council, what I discovered in human space changed everything I thought I knew about warfare and conquest. He paused, his compound eyes scanning the faces of the assembled representatives. Some showed curiosity, others skepticism, and a few displayed the cold calculation of beings who had survived in a galaxy full of predators. To understand my decision, you must first understand how the Valerian Empire has operated for centuries. We are a warrior species, born on a world where only the strong survive. Our expansion across the galaxy has followed a simple pattern. We study our enemies, identify their weaknesses, and strike with overwhelming force. In 300 years, we have never encountered a species we could not defeat. The speaker's energy field pulsed with interest. And yet you withdrew from human space without engaging them in battle. What made these humans so different? Zekthar's thoughts drifted back to that first day on New Detroit, the human colony world that had become his introduction to a species unlike any other he had encountered. It began with routine intelligence gathering. After establishing orbital control over the human world they called New Detroit, I ordered my troops to secure their military installations and data centers. Standard procedure for any conquest, we needed to understand their capabilities, their chain of command, their strategic thinking. He remembered walking through the human military complex, his boots echoing on the metal floors while his soldiers swept the corridors. The humans had evacuated most of their personnel, leaving behind only essential staff and a single officer who had volunteered to remain and facilitate the transition. Captain Jake Morrison had been a middle-aged human with graying hair and calm eyes that seemed to hold secrets. The human officer Morrison was unlike any defeated enemy I had encountered. He showed no fear, no anger, no desperation. When I demanded access to their military databases, he simply nodded and led me to their archives. He said something that puzzled me at the time. "You're welcome to look, Commander, but I don't think you'll like what you find." Zekthar's forearms gestured as he continued his testimony. I dismissed his words as empty bravado from a defeated soldier. How wrong I was. The human military archives contained detailed records of their conflicts spanning over 5,000 years. At first, I was pleased by this discovery. Most species we had conquered had fragmentary military histories, making it difficult to understand their tactical evolution. But humans had documented everything with obsessive detail. The chamber fell silent as the alien commander's voice took on a darker tone. What I found in those archives shattered my understanding of warfare itself. These humans had not been fighting alien invaders or external threats for most of their history. They had been fighting themselves. For thousands of years, humans had turned their weapons, their tactics, their most creative and destructive impulses against their own kind. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Imagine, honored council members, if your species had spent millennia perfecting the art of war against enemies who thought exactly like you, who shared your biology, your psychology, your fundamental nature. Imagine the level of tactical sophistication required to consistently defeat opponents who understood your every strength and weakness because they were you. The speaker's energy field flickered with what might have been concern. You speak of internal conflicts as if they were unusual. Commander, most species experience civil wars and territorial disputes. Zekthar's mandibles spread in what humans would have recognized as a grimace. Not like this, honored speaker. Not with this intensity, this creativity, this absolute commitment to victory regardless of cost. As I delved deeper into their records, I realized that humans had weaponized everything. They fought with swords and spears, with chemistry and biology, with psychology and economics. They had turned war into an art form, and they had been practicing that art on each other for thousands of years. The alien commander's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. That was only the beginning of what I discovered. Captain Morrison watched me review those early records, and I could see something in his eyes that I had never seen in a defeated enemy before. It was not fear or hatred, it was pity. He pitied me for what I was about to learn. As Zekthar concluded his opening testimony, the weight of his revelation hung heavy in the chamber. The assembled representatives of 12 species sat in contemplative silence, beginning to understand that they were about to hear something that would change their perception of the galaxy's newest spacefaring species forever. Zekthar's compound eyes focused on the holographic display that materialized before him in the council chamber. The image showed ancient human settlements, primitive by galactic standards, yet the alien commander's expression remained grim as he continued his testimony. The deeper I went into human military history, the more disturbed I became. Captain Morrison assigned 2 of his staff to guide me through their records. Lieutenant Dan Cooper was a historian who specialized in ancient warfare, and Dr. Lisa Grant was an archaeologist who had spent decades studying battlefield remains. Both humans seemed almost eager to share their knowledge, as if they took pride in their species' violent past. The speaker's energy field pulsed with curiosity. What did you discover about their earliest conflicts that concerned you so greatly? Zekthar's forearms moved in a gesture that conveyed deep unease. Most species fight for simple reasons: territory, resources, mates, survival. These are logical conflicts that serve evolutionary purposes. But humans fought for concepts that my species could barely comprehend. They waged war over ideas, over invisible deities, over philosophical differences that had no bearing on their physical survival. He gestured toward the holographic display, which now showed images of ancient battles. Dr. Grant showed me archaeological evidence of conflicts that occurred over 8,000 years ago. Even in their earliest civilizations, humans displayed a capacity for organized violence that was unprecedented. They did not simply fight to drive away enemies or claim territory. They fought to completely destroy their opponents, to erase them from existence. The alien commander's voice took on a tone of reluctant admiration mixed with horror. Lieutenant Cooper introduced me to their concept of total war. He explained how human leaders throughout history had understood that defeating an enemy army was not enough. They needed to break the enemy's will to fight, to destroy their capacity to resist, to eliminate their ability to recover. This thinking produced strategies that were both brilliant and terrifying. Zekthar paused, his mandibles clicking as he recalled specific examples. I learned about a human leader named Alexander who conquered most of the known world in his time. What struck me was not just his tactical skill, but his psychological approach to warfare. He would offer mercy to enemies who surrendered immediately, but showed no mercy to those who resisted. This created a reputation that preceded his armies. making future conquests easier because his enemies were already defeated in their minds before the battle began. The holographic display shifted to show ancient siege warfare, with humans using primitive but effective machines to breach city walls. But it was when I learned about Hannibal that I truly began to understand the depth of human military thinking. This was a human who spent years planning a single campaign against his enemies. He marched an army across frozen mountains, losing half his forces in the process, simply to attack his enemies from an unexpected direction. Zekthar's forearms spread wide in a gesture of disbelief. The Battle of Cannae showed me something, but no other species had ever achieved. Hannibal used his enemy's strength against them. He deliberately weakened the center of his army, allowing his opponents to push forward, then closed the trap around them. In a single day, he destroyed an army twice the size of his own. But what horrified me most was how he did it. He studied his enemies so thoroughly that he could predict their every move, then turn their own tactics into their destruction. The speaker's energy field flickered with what might have been concern. You speak of tactical innovation as if it were unusual. Many species develop new strategies. Not like this, Zekthar replied, his voice carrying a weight of conviction. Most species develop tactics to fight specific enemies or overcome particular challenges. Humans develop tactics to fight other humans, beings who shared their intelligence, their psychology, their fundamental nature. They had to constantly innovate because their enemies could adapt to any strategy. This created an arms race of military thinking that lasted for thousands of years. The holographic display now showed the Mongol invasions, with vast armies sweeping across continents. Lieutenant Cooper explained how a human leader named Genghis Khan conquered more territory than any other individual in their history. But what impressed me was not the size of his conquests, but the systematic nature of his approach. He studied every enemy, adapted to every terrain, incorporated the best tactics from every defeated foe. His armies were not just military forces, they were learning machines that grew stronger with each victory. Zekthar's voice dropped to a whisper as he continued. Dr. Grant showed me evidence of siege warfare that demonstrated human creativity and destruction. They invented machines specifically designed to breach fortifications, but more importantly, they developed psychological tactics to break the will of defenders. They would display the consequences of resistance in ways that ensured other cities would surrender without a fight. The alien commander's compound eyes fixed on the assembled council members. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was their approach to the Crusades. These were wars fought not for territory or resources, but for control of religious sites. Humans crossed continents and fought for centuries over buildings and symbols. They developed logistics systems that could support armies thousands of miles from home, fighting enemies who were just as committed to their cause. He gestured at the holographic display, which now showed medieval battlefield tactics. A human leader called Richard the Lionheart demonstrated something that no Valerian commander had ever achieved. He maintained discipline and fighting effectiveness in his troops while operating in hostile territory, far from supply lines, fighting an enemy on their home ground. His tactical innovations in siege warfare and cavalry charges became standard practice for centuries. Zekthar's forearms moved in a complex pattern that conveyed deep respect mixed with fear. What I learned from studying these ancient conflicts was that humans had been preparing for galactic warfare for thousands of years without knowing it. Every battle against their own kind had taught them lessons that would make them formidable opponents against any alien species. They had learned to fight enemies who thought like them, which meant they could adapt to fight enemies who thought differently. The chamber fell silent as the weight of Zekthar's revelations settled over the assembled representatives. The alien commander's testimony had only begun to scratch the surface of human military history, and already the implications were staggering. The speaker's energy field pulsed with a mixture of fascination and growing alarm as the council began to understand that they were dealing with a species unlike any they had encountered before. The holographic display in the council chamber shifted to show massive industrial complexes belching smoke into gray skies. Zekthar's forearms trembled slightly as he gestured toward the images, his compound eyes reflecting the harsh light of human factories from centuries past. What I discovered next about human warfare changed my understanding of what it meant to fight a war. Captain Morrison introduced me to Colonel Steve Martinez, a military attaché who specialized in what humans called their industrial age. Dr. Helen Brooks, a scholar of 20th century conflicts, joined our sessions. Both humans seemed almost excited to share their knowledge, as if they were proud of their species' ability to turn entire civilizations into weapons of war. The speaker's energy field pulsed with growing concern. You speak of industrial warfare as if it were something unprecedented. Many species have used manufacturing capabilities to support military efforts. Zekthar's mandibles clicked in what humans would have recognized as bitter laughter. Honored speaker, no species in galactic history has ever weaponized their entire civilization the way humans did during their industrial conflicts. They did not simply use factories to make weapons. They turned their entire societies into machines designed for one purpose: the complete destruction of their enemies. The alien commander's voice took on a tone of reluctant admiration mixed with horror. Dr. Brooks showed me records of their American Civil War, a conflict that lasted 4 years and claimed over 600,000 human lives. But what disturbed me was not the death toll, but the systematic nature of their approach to warfare. A human general named Ulysses Grant understood something that most military leaders never grasp: that wars are won not by brilliant tactics alone, but by the ability to sustain those tactics over time. The holographic display now showed vast armies marching across continents, supplied by complex networks of railroads and telegraph lines. Colonel Martinez explained how humans had learned to coordinate military operations across thousands of miles using primitive communication systems. They moved entire armies like pieces on a game board, supplied them with precision, and replaced their losses with industrial efficiency. This was not warfare as other species understood it. This was warfare as a systematic process. Zekthar's forearms moved in a complex gesture that conveyed deep unease. The Battle of Gettysburg demonstrated something that no Valerian commander had ever achieved. For 3 days, 2 human armies fought with such intensity that the ground itself was transformed into a landscape of death. But what impressed me was not the ferocity of the fighting, but the logistics that made it possible. Both armies were supplied, reinforced, and coordinated across hundreds of miles of territory while engaged in active combat. The speaker's energy field flickered with what might have been disbelief. You speak of these conflicts as if they were somehow more sophisticated than modern warfare. Because they were, Zekthar replied, his voice carrying absolute conviction. These humans were fighting enemies who shared their technology, their industrial capacity, their fundamental understanding of warfare. They had to innovate constantly, because their opponents could match them in every conventional measure. This created a level of military sophistication that most galactic civilizations never achieve. The holographic display shifted to show the trenches of World War I, with humans crouched in muddy holes while explosions lit the dark sky above them. Dr. Brooks introduced me to their concept of total war during what they called the Great War. For 4 years, entire nations devoted every resource to the destruction of their enemies. They rationed food, conscripted civilians, and turned every factory into a weapon of war. Children learned to hate their enemies before they learned to read. Zekthar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The Battle of the Somme showed me the true horror of human warfare. In a single day, 60,000 humans died attacking positions that could not be taken. But they continued the assault for months, feeding their soldiers into the meat grinder of modern warfare because they understood that victory required absolute commitment regardless of cost. The alien commander's compound eyes fixed on the assembled council members. But it was when I learned about their Second World War that I truly understood what humans were capable of. This was a conflict that spanned the entire planet, involving every continent except one. Dr. Brooks showed me how humans had learned to fight simultaneous campaigns across multiple theaters. coordinating air, land, and sea operations on a scale that defied comprehension. The holographic display now showed massive tank battles, with thousands of armored vehicles clashing across vast plains. Colonel Martinez explained how a human general named Erwin Rommel had mastered the art of mobile warfare. He could move entire armies across deserts, coordinate complex logistics under hostile conditions, and adapt to any tactical situation. But what impressed me most was his opponent, a human named George Patton, who matched Rommel's innovations and eventually surpassed them. Zekthar's forearms spread wide in a gesture of disbelief. These humans had learned to fight wars on multiple fronts simultaneously while maintaining industrial production, civilian morale, and complex alliance systems. They developed strategies that could function across different climates, terrains, and technological levels. Their military thinking had evolved to handle any conceivable battlefield condition. The speaker's energy field pulsed with growing alarm. You speak of their adaptability as if it were supernatural. It was systematic, Zekthar corrected. Dr. Brooks showed me how human military academies studied every conflict, documented every innovation, and incorporated every lesson learned into their training programs. They had created institutions dedicated to the science of warfare, ensuring that each generation of soldiers was more skilled than the last. The holographic display shifted to show the massive industrial complexes that had supported the war effort. But perhaps most disturbing was their approach to logistics. Humans had learned to project military power across entire oceans, maintaining supply lines that stretched for thousands of miles. They could build airfields in jungles, establish ports on hostile beaches, and create military infrastructure anywhere. On their planet, Zekthar's voice carried a note of awe mixed with terror. A human leader named Winston Churchill demonstrated something that no other species had ever achieved. He maintained his nation's will to fight even when facing inevitable defeat, then orchestrated a comeback that reversed the entire course of the war. His understanding of psychology, logistics, and alliance politics allowed him to turn Britain's darkest hour into the foundation of ultimate victory. The alien commander's mandibles clicked as he concluded this portion of his testimony. What I learned from studying their industrial warfare was that humans had weaponized not just their technology, but their entire civilization. They had learned to fight wars that consumed everything, transformed everything, and ultimately strengthened everything. They emerged from each conflict more capable than before, having absorbed the lessons of total warfare into their cultural DNA. The chamber fell silent as the weight of Zekthar's revelations settled over the assembled representatives. The alien commander had revealed only a portion of human military history, yet the implications were already staggering. The council was beginning to understand that they were dealing with a species that had spent centuries perfecting the art of warfare against opponents who matched their every capability. The holographic display in the council chamber flickered and changed to show a mushroom-shaped cloud rising into the sky, its terrible beauty casting shadows across Zekthar's scarred features. The alien commander's forearms hung motionless. At his sides as he stared at the image, his compound eyes reflecting the horror of what he had learned about humanity's most terrifying achievement. What I discovered next about human warfare shattered every assumption I had about the nature of conflict itself. Captain Morrison introduced me to Admiral Paul Johnson, a naval strategist who had spent his career understanding submarine warfare, and Dr. Karen White, a nuclear physicist who had helped develop the very weapons that haunted my nightmares. Both humans spoke about their nuclear age with a mixture of pride and terror that I had never seen in any species. The speaker's energy field pulsed with deep concern. You speak of nuclear weapons as if they were something unprecedented. Many civilizations have developed planet-destroying capabilities. Zekthar's mandibles clicked in what humans would have recognized as bitter disagreement. Honored speaker, other species have created weapons of mass destruction, but no species has ever lived with them the way humans did. They did not simply build these weapons and store them safely away. They integrated them into their military thinking, their political systems, their entire way of life. For decades, they woke up each morning knowing that their civilization could end before sunset. The alien commander's voice took on a tone of horrified fascination. Dr. White explained how humans had developed nuclear weapons during their Second World War, then used them against their own kind to end the conflict. 2 cities were destroyed in seconds, killing hundreds of thousands of people instantly. But what disturbed me was not the weapons themselves, but how humans responded to possessing such power. The holographic display now showed maps of the world, with arrows indicating missile trajectories and defensive positions. Admiral Johnson described their Cold War, a conflict that lasted for decades without a single direct battle between the major powers. Instead, humans fought through proxy wars, espionage, and the constant threat of mutual annihilation. They had created a form of warfare based entirely on the psychology of fear. Zekthar's forearms moved in a complex gesture that conveyed deep unease. The Cuban Missile Crisis demonstrated something that no other species had ever achieved. For 13 days, human leaders played a game of strategic chess while holding the fate of their entire planet in their hands. A human named John Kennedy faced down his opponent while knowing that a single mistake could end human civilization. The level of psychological pressure required to make rational decisions under such circumstances was beyond my comprehension. The speaker's energy field flickered with what might have been disbelief. "You speak of this crisis as if it were somehow admirable rather than terrifying." "It was both," Zekthar replied, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "What impressed me was not their willingness to risk everything, but their ability to maintain rational decision-making while standing at the edge of the abyss. They had learned to fight wars where victory meant survival and defeat meant extinction, yet they continued to function as a civilization." The holographic display shifted to show submarine warfare, with sleek vessels prowling beneath the ocean surface. Admiral Johnson explained how humans had learned to fight wars beneath the waves, where entire fleets could hide in the depths while carrying enough firepower to destroy continents. They developed tactics for fighting in 3 dimensions, using the ocean as both shield and weapon. Their submarine commanders had to master not just naval warfare, but psychology, physics, and international politics. Zekthar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But it was when I learned about their proxy wars that I truly understood the sophistication of human military thinking. They fought conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, and dozens of other locations, without the major powers ever directly engaging each other. They had learned to wage war through surrogates, using smaller conflicts to test strategies and weapons while avoiding the ultimate confrontation." The alien commander's compound eyes fixed on the assembled council members. "The Vietnam War showed me something that no Valerian commander had ever faced. Humans had learned to fight enemies who used their own tactics against them. The North Vietnamese understood that they could not defeat American military power directly, so they turned the conflict into a war of attrition that targeted American political will rather than American armies." The holographic display now showed jungle warfare, with soldiers moving through dense vegetation while helicopters circled overhead. Dr. White explained how humans had developed air mobility tactics that allowed them to fight in any terrain, under any conditions. They could insert troops into hostile territory, support them with precision firepower, and extract them before the enemy could respond. Their tactical flexibility had reached a level that seemed almost supernatural. Zekthar's forearms spread wide in a gesture of disbelief. But perhaps most disturbing was their approach to intelligence warfare. They had learned to fight battles in the shadows, using information as a weapon more powerful than any physical force. Their intelligence agencies could destabilize governments, manipulate public opinion, and influence events on the other side of the planet. The speaker's energy field pulsed with growing alarm. "You speak of their intelligence capabilities as if they were fundamentally different from other species." "They were," Zekthar corrected. "Most species use intelligence gathering to support military operations. Humans had learned to use intelligence operations as warfare itself. They could achieve strategic objectives without firing a single shot, simply by controlling information flow and manipulating their enemies' decision-making processes. The holographic display shifted to show space-based satellites and missile defense systems. Admiral Johnson revealed how humans had extended their military thinking beyond their planet's atmosphere. They had learned to fight wars in space, using satellites for communication, navigation, and surveillance. Their ability to coordinate global military operations through space-based systems was unprecedented in galactic history. Zekthar's voice carried a note of awe mixed with terror. A human leader named Douglas MacArthur demonstrated something that no other species had ever achieved. He understood that modern warfare required not just tactical skill, but the ability to manage complex political, economic, and social factors simultaneously. His strategic thinking integrated military power with diplomatic pressure, economic leverage, and psychological warfare. The alien commander's mandibles clicked as he continued. But what truly horrified me was their concept of mutually assured destruction. They had created a military doctrine based on the promise that any attack would result in the complete annihilation of both sides. They had weaponized the fear of extinction itself, using it to maintain a peace that was really just a pause between wars. The holographic display now showed missile silos and nuclear submarines, symbols of the awesome destructive power that humans had learned to live with. Dr. White explained how human military planners had developed scenarios for fighting nuclear wars, calculating acceptable losses in the millions while maintaining the capability to function as a civilization. Their willingness to contemplate such scenarios while working to prevent them showed a level of psychological sophistication that no other species had achieved. Zekthar's forearms moved in a pattern that conveyed deep respect mixed with fear. What I learned from studying their nuclear age was that humans had evolved beyond traditional concepts of warfare. They had learned to fight conflicts where the stakes were so high that winning and losing became meaningless concepts. They had developed military thinking that could function in a world where every decision carried the weight of species survival. The chamber fell silent as the weight of Zekthar's revelations settled over the assembled representatives. The alien commander had revealed how humans had learned to wage war while holding the power to destroy their own world, yet had somehow maintained their civilization through decades of ultimate tension. The council was beginning to understand that they were dealing with a species that had mastered the most dangerous form of warfare imaginable. The holographic display in the council chamber shifted to show scattered groups of humans moving through desert terrain, their faces covered and their weapons unfamiliar. Zekthar's forearms twitched with nervous energy as he watched the images, his compound eyes reflecting the harsh light of conflicts that had no clear battlefields and no obvious enemies. What I discovered about human warfare in their modern era destroyed my understanding of what it meant to fight a war. Captain Morrison introduced me to General Rick Stone, a special operations commander who had spent decades fighting enemies that could not be defeated by conventional means. Dr. Amy Turner, an expert in what humans called asymmetric warfare, joined our discussions along with Colonel Ben Davis, who specialized in drone warfare. All three humans spoke about their contemporary conflicts with a mixture of frustration and grim satisfaction that I had never encountered in any military leader. The speaker's energy field pulsed with growing unease. You speak of modern human warfare as if it were somehow more disturbing than their previous conflicts. Zekthar's mandibles clicked in what humans would have recognized as bitter acknowledgement. Honored speaker, their modern warfare was not more destructive than their previous conflicts, but it was far more insidious. They had learned to fight wars without traditional battlefields, without clear enemies, without defined objectives. They had evolved beyond the concept of warfare as most species understand it. The alien commander's voice took on a tone of reluctant admiration mixed with horror. Dr. Turner explained how their Gulf War had demonstrated something unprecedented in galactic military history. In a matter of weeks, human forces had destroyed an entire enemy army using precision weapons, satellite guidance, and real-time intelligence. But what disturbed me was not the efficiency of their victory, but how they had achieved it. The holographic display now showed sleek aircraft dropping bombs with surgical precision while soldiers coordinated attacks through advanced communication systems. General Stone described how humans had learned to fight wars using information as their primary weapon. They could track enemy movements in real time, intercept communications, and coordinate attacks across vast distances with split-second timing. Their ability to process battlefield information had reached a level that seemed almost magical. Zekthar's forearms moved in a complex gesture that conveyed deep concern. But it was when I learned about their war on terror that I truly understood how human warfare had evolved. This was not a conflict against a nation or an army, but against an idea, a method of fighting that could emerge anywhere and strike without warning. They had learned to fight enemies who used their own civilian populations as shields and weapons. The speaker's energy field flickered with what might have been confusion. You speak of fighting ideas as if it were a new concept. Many species have dealt with insurgencies and terrorist movements. Not like this, Zekthar replied, his voice carrying absolute conviction. Most species respond to terrorism by increasing security and hunting down the perpetrators. Humans understood that they were fighting a form of warfare that required them to win hearts and minds while simultaneously destroying their enemy's ability to operate. They had to become both warriors and diplomats, both destroyers and builders. The holographic display shifted to show urban warfare, with soldiers moving through destroyed buildings while civilians watched from windows and doorways. Colonel Davis explained how humans had learned to fight in cities, where every building could hide an enemy and every civilian could be a potential threat or ally. They developed tactics for urban combat that required them to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants in split-second decisions while under fire. Zekthar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The battles in Iraq and Afghanistan showed me something that no other species had ever achieved. Humans could fight simultaneous campaigns on multiple continents while maintaining their industrial capacity, their civilian government, and their democratic institutions. They had learned to wage long-term conflicts without transforming their entire society into a military machine. The alien commander's compound eyes fixed on the assembled council members. But perhaps most disturbing was their development of drone warfare. Colonel Davis showed me how humans had learned to fight battles from thousands of miles away, using remote-controlled aircraft to strike targets with precision while their operators returned home for dinner with their families. They had separated the act of killing from the psychological cost of combat. The holographic display now showed operators sitting in control rooms, manipulating joysticks and keyboards while screens displayed targets on the other side of the planet. Dr. Turner explained how this technology had fundamentally changed the nature of warfare. Humans could now project military power anywhere on their planet without risking their own soldiers, but they had also created a form of combat that was both more precise and more morally complex than anything that had come before. Zekthar's forearms spread wide in a gesture of disbelief. What impressed me most was their ability to adapt their tactics to fight enemies who used unconventional methods. When faced with suicide bombers, they developed new approaches to intelligence, gathering, and preventive action. When confronted with improvised explosive devices, they created new technologies and tactics to counter them. Their military thinking had become a continuous process of adaptation and innovation. The speaker's energy field pulsed with growing alarm. You speak of their adaptability as if it were limitless. It appeared to be, Zekthar corrected. General Stone described how human special operations forces had learned to fight in any environment. Under any conditions, against any enemy, they could operate in jungles, deserts, mountains, cities, or Arctic conditions with equal effectiveness. Their training programs had created soldiers who were more skilled and versatile than any warriors in galactic history. The holographic display shifted to show cyber warfare, with streams of data flowing between computer networks while analysts worked at banks of monitors. But what truly horrified me was their development of information warfare. Dr. Turner explained how humans had learned to fight battles in cyberspace attacking enemy computer systems, disrupting communications, and manipulating information flow. They could cripple an enemy's infrastructure without firing a single shot. Zekzar's voice carried a note of awe mixed with terror. They had learned to fight wars economically, using trade sanctions and financial pressure as weapons more effective than military force. They could isolate enemies from global markets, freeze their assets, and destroy their economies without ever engaging in direct combat. Their understanding of economic warfare was more sophisticated than most species' understanding of traditional military tactics. The alien commander's mandibles clicked as he continued. Colonel Davis revealed how humans had extended their military capabilities into space, using satellites not just for communication and navigation, but as weapons platforms and intelligence-gathering tools. They had learned to fight wars that spanned not just continents, but entire orbital zones around their planet. The holographic display now showed private military contractors, armed civilians working alongside regular soldiers in conflict zones. Perhaps most disturbing was their use of private military companies. They had learned to outsource warfare itself, using civilian contractors to perform military functions while maintaining political deniability. They had created a form of warfare that blurred the lines between military and civilian, between public and private, between war and business. Zekzar's forearms moved in a pattern that conveyed deep respect mixed with fear. What I learned from studying their modern warfare was that humans had evolved beyond traditional concepts of military conflict. They had learned to fight wars that were simultaneously local and global, military and civilian, physical and virtual. Their military thinking had become so sophisticated that they could wage multiple types of warfare simultaneously while maintaining their democratic institutions and civilian way of life. The chamber fell silent as the weight of Zekzar's revelations settled over the assembled representatives. The alien commander had revealed how humans had learned to fight wars that defied traditional military categories, using technologies and tactics that other species had never imagined. The council was beginning to understand that they were dealing with a species that had mastered every conceivable form of warfare while somehow maintaining their civilization's fundamental character. The holographic display in the council chamber went dark, leaving only the soft glow of the floating orbs to illuminate Zekzar's weathered features. The alien commander's forearms hung at his sides as he prepared to deliver the final portion of his testimony, the revelation that had changed everything he thought he knew about warfare and convinced him to withdraw the entire Valerian fleet from human space. What I discovered in the final phase of my investigation shattered every assumption I had about human nature and military capability. Captain Morrison had been patient with my questions for weeks, allowing me to delve deep into their military archives and speak with their experts. But I sensed that he had been waiting for me to ask the right question, and when I finally did, his answer changed the course of galactic history. The speaker's energy field pulsed with intense curiosity. "What question did you ask that revealed something so significant?" Zekzar's mandibles clicked in what humans would have recognized as nervous anticipation. After weeks of studying their conflicts, I asked Captain Morrison why humans had never achieved lasting peace. Every other species in galactic history had eventually learned to live without constant warfare, but humans seemed incapable of stopping their conflicts with each other. His answer was both simple and terrifying. They had never wanted to stop. The alien commander's voice took on a tone of profound realization. Morrison explained that humans had understood something that no other species had ever grasped. They knew that warfare was not a problem to be solved, but a skill to be perfected. Every conflict they had fought against each other had been preparation for something greater, something that they had always known was coming even when they could not name it. The holographic display flickered back to life, showing classified military documents and strategic planning files. Morrison then granted me access to their most sensitive military archives, files that detailed their preparations for what they called external contact scenarios for decades. Even centuries, human military planners had been developing strategies for fighting enemies that did not yet exist, preparing for wars against opponents they had never seen. Zekthar's forearms moved in a complex gesture that conveyed both admiration and terror. Fleet Admiral Susan Clark had spent her entire career developing contingency plans for alien invasion. Dr. Peter Hayes, a xenobiologist, had worked with military strategists to predict the capabilities and weaknesses of hypothetical alien species. President William Adams had authorized the creation of secret military units dedicated to preparing for contact with hostile alien civilizations. The speaker's energy field flickered with what might have been disbelief. "You speak of these preparations as if they were somehow prophetic." "They were systematic," Zekthar corrected, his voice carrying absolute conviction. Human military thinkers had analyzed every possible scenario for alien contact, from peaceful first meetings to full-scale invasion. They had developed strategies for fighting enemies with superior technology, different biology, and unknown tactical doctrines. They had prepared for wars that most species could not even imagine. The holographic display now showed detailed battle plans and weapon specifications designed for fighting alien enemies. What disturbed me most was the thoroughness of their preparations. They had identified the likely weaknesses of species that relied on hive minds, developed tactics for fighting enemies with different sensory capabilities, and created weapons designed to function against alien biology. They had essentially fought every possible galactic war in their minds before any aliens had ever arrived. Zekthar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But the most terrifying revelation came when Morrison showed me their psychological warfare protocols for alien enemies. They had studied their own history of fighting other humans and identified the universal principles that could be applied to any opponent. They understood that every species, regardless of biology or technology, would have psychological vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The alien commander's compound eyes fixed on the assembled council members. I realized that every war humans had fought against each other had been a training exercise for fighting us. Every tactical innovation, every strategic doctrine, every weapon system they had developed had been unconsciously designed to give them advantages against alien opponents. They had spent thousands of years learning to fight enemies who shared their intelligence and psychology, making them uniquely prepared to fight enemies who did not. The holographic display shifted to show human military academies and training facilities. Morrison explained how human military education had always emphasized adaptability above all else. Their officers were trained to fight any enemy in any environment under any conditions. They had created military institutions that could adapt to threats that had never existed before, because they had learned to adapt to threats from their own kind. Zekthar's forearms spread wide in a gesture of complete capitulation. When I understood this, I knew that the Valerian Empire could never defeat humanity in a military conflict. We had conquered dozens of species by studying their weaknesses and exploiting their limitations. But humans had no exploitable weaknesses because they had spent millennia identifying and eliminating their own weaknesses through constant warfare. With themselves? The speaker's energy field pulsed with growing alarm. "You speak of withdrawal as if it were the only option. Surely the Valerian Empire's superior technology and experience would have provided significant advantages." "No," Zekthar replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Every advantage we possessed, humans had already faced when fighting each other. Superior numbers, better technology, more resources, greater coordination. These were all advantages that some human armies had possessed over others throughout their history. They had learned to win against superior opponents because they had been doing it for thousands of years." The holographic display now showed human space-based weapons and defensive systems. Morrison revealed that humans had already begun militarizing their space around their planet, not because they feared any specific threat, but because they understood that any species capable of reaching their world would possess capabilities that required space-based defenses. They had anticipated our arrival and prepared accordingly. Zekthar's voice carried a note of profound respect mixed with fear. But what convinced me to order the complete withdrawal of Valerian forces was Morrison's final revelation. He told me that humans had always known that their greatest enemy would not be each other, but something from outside their world. Every war they had fought, every weapon they had developed, every tactical doctrine they had created had been unconsciously designed to prepare them for that ultimate conflict. The alien commander's mandibles clicked as he delivered his final testimony. Morrison looked me in the eyes and said something that has haunted me ever since. "Commander, you have studied our history of warfare and found it disturbing, but you have missed the most important point. We have never lost a war that we considered truly necessary for our survival. We have never faced an enemy that we could not eventually defeat. We have never encountered a threat that we could not overcome through adaptation and determination. We have been waiting for you for thousands of years, and we are ready." The holographic display went dark as Zekthar concluded his testimony. "I ordered the withdrawal of all Valerian forces from human space not because we feared their current military capabilities, but because we understood what those capabilities represented. Humans had weaponized their entire evolutionary history, turning their greatest weakness into their greatest strength. They had learned to fight any enemy by learning to fight themselves." The speaker's energy field pulsed with what might have been resignation. "And your recommendation to this council?" Zekthar's forearms moved in a final gesture of warning. "Honored Speaker, members of the council, I have spent 400 years conquering species across this galaxy. I have never encountered an enemy that could not be defeated through superior strategy, technology, or numbers. But humans are not just another species to be conquered. They are a species that has spent its entire existence preparing for galactic warfare without knowing it. They have turned their capacity for violence into a science, their understanding of conflict into an art form, their military thinking into a weapon more dangerous than any technology." The alien commander's voice carried absolute finality. "My recommendation is simple. Leave humanity alone. Do not threaten them. Do not challenge them. Do not give them any reason to demonstrate what they are truly capable of. They have spent thousands of years learning to fight enemies exactly like us, and they are very, very good at it." The chamber fell into complete silence as the weight of Zekthar's testimony settled over the assembled representatives. The galaxy had encountered its most dangerous species, and the wisest course of action was to ensure that species never had reason to demonstrate just how dangerous they could be.